The funeral home was cloaked in silence, broken only by the soft hum of whispers and the occasional muffled sob. I stood near the door, my hands gripping my purse as I watched my siblings encircle Dad's casket. They hovered like vultures, faces painted with grief that felt more performative than genuine. Rachel's sharp eyes found me across the room. She leaned in to whisper to Mark, who glanced over his shoulder with that all too familiar expression of contempt. A moment later, he was striding toward me, Rachel trailing behind, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You need to leave," Mark said, his voice low but firm. "You're not welcome here." I refused to flinch, meeting his glare head-on. He was my father, too. Rachel let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Really? Where were you when he needed surgery last year? Off living your perfect little life while we handled everything." My chest tightened, but I held my ground. "I offered to help. Both of you told me he didn't want my money." Mark stepped closer, his face darkening. "You don't get to rewrite history. You abandoned him. You abandoned us. So just go." He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, and before I could protest, security was at my side, escorting me out like I was the intruder in my own family. As I passed the casket, I stole one last glance at Dad's lifeless form, the weight in my chest suffocating. They didn't know. None of them knew. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how my father's death unraveled the lies that bound our family and the truth I had to fight to reveal. I wasn't always the outcast. Growing up, I was the steady one. While Rachel basked in her role as the eldest, charming her way into everything she wanted, and Mark thrived as the baby, playing the favorite, I was the reliable middle child. The responsible one. Boring, Rachel used to say with a sneer. Every Saturday morning, I joined Dad at his small accounting firm, sitting beside him at the old desk while he patiently taught me the business. "You've got a gift for numbers, Sarah," he'd say, his eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses, "just like your old man." Those mornings were ours, quiet, filled with the comforting hum of the ancient desktop and the rich aroma of his black coffee. They were moments I cherished, though I didn't realize then how they'd one day become weapons in my siblings' arsenal of resentment. When Mom passed away, everything changed. I was 24, fresh out of business school, juggling the demands of a new career. The night she died, I rushed home to find Dad sitting in the dark, clutching her favorite sweater. "I couldn't save her," he whispered, his voice trembling. "All those years working, saving, and it wasn't enough." That night, I made a silent promise. I would never let money be the reason we lost someone again. I threw myself into my career, working long hours and saving every bonus, building a safety net for my family, though they never knew about it. Rachel and Mark, of course, saw things differently. To them, I was the selfish one, too busy chasing success to care about Dad. They stayed in our hometown, painting themselves as the dutiful children, while quietly bleeding him dry. I discovered their betrayal by accident. One of Dad's old clients called me, concerned about irregularities in his accounts. A weekend spent combing through his financials revealed the ugly truth. Rachel had opened credit cards in his name, maxing them out on shopping sprees and vacations. Mark had convinced him to co-sign a loan for a failed business venture, leaving Dad saddled with over $200,000 in debt. When I confronted them, they turned it back on me. "At least we're here," Rachel snapped. "You don't even visit unless it's convenient for you." "You don't get to judge us," Mark added. "You left. We stayed." Dad, ever the peacemaker, refused to hear it. "They're going through a rough patch," he'd say, brushing off their actions. "Family has to stick together." So I found another way. I created an anonymous trust to pay off Dad's debts, covering the bills without anyone knowing it was me. For 2 years, I kept our family afloat, silently watching Rachel and Mark take credit for managing Dad's finances. Then came the diagnosis: Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live at best. I dove into research, desperate to find options that might extend his time. But Rachel and Mark shut me out, claiming they knew what was best. The doctors said treatment would only make him suffer more. Rachel told me, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're not the only one who loves him," Mark added. "We've been here. You haven't." They blocked me from speaking to his doctors, changed his phone number, and painted me as the estranged daughter trying to interfere. By the time I hired a lawyer to fight for medical proxy, it was too late. Dad died on a Tuesday morning. I found out through Rachel's Facebook post, complete with a curated photo of the loving family surrounding him in his final moments. Which brings me back to the funeral. As security ushered me out, I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the weight of the envelope Dad had given me 3 months earlier. "I know what you've done," he'd said, sliding it across his desk during one of our final conversations. "And I need you to know something." The rest of that conversation was a blur, overshadowed by grief and the chaos that followed. But now, as I stepped out into the cold, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was in that envelope, it would change everything. I just had to find the courage to use it. The first warm rays of sunlight streamed through my apartment windows as I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling in my hands. For 3 months, I'd carried it everywhere, unopened, like some unbearable secret. Dad's handwriting, shaky but deliberate, stared back at me. "For Sarah, open after." I broke the seal, my breath catching as I pulled out the contents. A letter, a USB drive, and a small brass key. The key was unmistakable, the one to Dad's safety deposit box. My fingers brushed the USB drive, but it was the letter that drew my attention first. His words, written just a week before our final meeting, spilled onto the page. "My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The cancer is moving faster than the doctors expected, but that's not why I'm writing. I need to confess something that's weighed on me for years. I failed as a father. I enabled Rachel and Mark's worst instincts, every manipulative request, every reckless decision, because it was easier than setting boundaries. I told myself it was love, but the truth is I was too afraid of conflict, too ashamed of the time I spent working instead of being present when you were all young. But you were different. I pushed you harder because I knew you could handle it. That wasn't fair to you, and it created a rift I fear can never be repaired. What your siblings don't know, what no one knows except my lawyer, is that I've been keeping records. Every fraudulent credit card, every forged signature, every doctored bank statement. It's all documented on the USB drive enclosed. The key is to my safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find my real will, updated 6 months ago when I discovered what Rachel and Mark had done. Mr. Patterson, my lawyer, holds the original copy. Now I leave the choice to you. You can expose the truth. The will stipulates that Rachel and Mark must repay every dollar they've stolen before receiving any inheritance. Mr. Patterson has instructions to involve the authorities if they refuse. Or you can let it go. Destroy everything and let them believe they've won. I'll understand either way. I need you to know one last thing, Sarah. Those Saturday mornings in the office were never just about teaching you business. They were the highlight of my week. You weren't just my daughter. You were my confidant, my greatest pride. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more. I'm sorry I let them push you away. Most of all, I'm sorry I waited until it was too late to do the right thing. Whatever you decide, know that I love you, and I am prouder of you than words can express. Love always, Dad. The letter slipped from my hands, fluttering onto the table like a fragile leaf. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long, golden streaks across the room. My coffee sat untouched, cold, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I reached for the USB drive with trembling fingers, plugging it into my laptop. The screen lit up with folders, meticulously labeled by year and type. Credit cards, loans, bank statements, recordings. My stomach churned as I clicked through the files. There it was, everything. Copies of fraudulent credit card applications, forged signatures, and video clips of Rachel and Mark discussing their schemes in Dad's office. Even emails where they mocked Dad's naivety. The evidence was airtight, damning enough to not only reclaim what they'd stolen but have them charged with fraud and elder abuse. I sat back, staring at the screen. With one call to Mr. Patterson, I could set the wheels of justice in motion. I could make them pay for what they'd done to Dad, to our family. But then memories surfaced, unbidden. Rachel at 16, showing me how to apply mascara before my first date. Mark at 12, sneaking into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. There was a time we were siblings, before the resentment, before the lies. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back to the present. A text from Rachel. Meeting with the estate lawyer tomorrow at 10. Try to show up this time if you care at all about Dad's wishes. I clenched my jaw, rereading her words, feeling the familiar sting of her condescension. A second buzz followed, this time from Mark. Hope you're happy with yourself. making a scene at Dad's funeral. Real classy. The anger flared, hot and sharp. But beneath it, there was something else. Doubt. What would justice look like? Was it exposing them for the frauds they were, or was it something else entirely? I stood abruptly, grabbing my keys and a small brass one from Dad's envelope. Before I made any decisions, I needed to see what else he had left behind. The real will might change everything, or confirm what I already suspected. The drive to First National Bank felt surreal, like navigating through a haze. Morning traffic blurred around me, the hum of the city distant and muted. Dad's voice echoed in my mind, soft but certain. The choice is yours. The bank lobby was serene when I arrived, the early morning stillness broken only by the hushed murmurs of a few customers and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The safety deposit box room felt like a world apart, quiet, almost reverent, the thick walls meeting the sounds outside. "Take all the time you need, Ms. Mitchell," the bank manager said as he handed me the key. His footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving me alone with the cold metallic box that held the final piece of Dad's puzzle. My hands trembled as I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside were two items, a thick envelope and a small leather journal that made my breath catch. I hadn't seen it in years, but I recognized it instantly. Dad had carried that journal everywhere, scribbling notes about work, family, and ideas for the future. I opened the envelope first. The will was exactly as Dad had described in his letter. Rachel and Mark would inherit nothing unless they repaid every cent they'd stolen, plus interest. But there was more. A second document outlined the full extent of Dad's estate, far beyond what any of us had imagined. The modest accounting firm I remembered as a child had quietly flourished into a multi-million-dollar empire. He had invested shrewdly, purchased properties, and built a fortune he'd never shared with anyone. What my siblings believed was a humble inheritance was actually a legacy that could change our lives forever, if we were willing to face the truth. But it was the journal that truly unraveled me. I flipped it open to a random page, the familiar scrawl bringing his voice back to life. Asterisk Sarah came by the office today. She thinks I don't know about the trust she set up, how she'd been quietly paying off Rachel and Mark's debts, my brilliant, compassionate daughter, always cleaning up the messes they make without asking for recognition. Just like her mother. I should stop her. Tell her to let them deal with the consequences of their actions. But watching her carry this family, even after the way they've treated her, it gives me hope. Maybe when I'm gone, she'll be strong enough to do what I couldn't, help them grow up. Asterisk. Tears blurred my vision as I turned page after page, each entry revealing the depth of Dad's struggles. His regrets, his love for us, his pride in me. The final entry, dated just days before his death, broke me entirely. I made the hardest decision of my life today, changed my will, documented everything. Sarah will hate having this burden placed on her, but she's the only one strong enough to bear it. Rachel and Mark need to learn. And Sarah needs to know she was never alone. The journal slipped from my hands, landing softly on the table as my phone buzzed. A reminder about tomorrow's meeting with the estate lawyer. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. Dad had trusted me to do what he couldn't, and I finally knew what I had to do. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Patterson's office 10 minutes early. Rachel and Mark were already there, their glares sharp enough to cut. I sat across from them, my back straight and my resolve firm. "Now that everyone's here," Mr. Patterson began, "we can review the terms of your father's will." Rachel rolled her eyes. "We already know what it says. The house and business get split 3 ways. Let's just get this over with." Mr. Patterson's gaze shifted to me. I gave a small nod. "Actually," he said, pulling out a document, "this is your father's updated will, executed 6 months ago." What followed was like watching a storm unravel in slow motion. As Mr. Patterson detailed the conditions, repaying stolen money, the hidden fortune, the consequences of noncompliance, Rachel and Mark's faces shifted from disbelief to fury. "This is insane," Mark erupted, slamming his fist on the table. "Sarah must have manipulated him into changing it." "You can't prove any of this," Rachel snapped, though her voice quivered. I reached into my bag and set the USB drive on the table. "Actually, I can." Dad kept meticulous records of everything. Their expressions collapsed into silence as Mr. Patterson played the recordings and presented the evidence. 2 hours later, the room was filled with the weight of realization. You have two options, Mr. Patterson concluded. Contest the will, in which case this evidence will go to the authorities, or accept your father's terms. Rachel was crying now, real tears for once, while Mark stared at the floor, his anger replaced by defeat. That's when I spoke up. There's a third option. I pulled out a set of documents I'd spent the night drafting. I'm offering to set up a structured repayment plan. You'll both work at the firm, learning the business from the ground up, just like I did. Every dollar you earn will go toward repaying the debt. Once it's cleared, you'll receive your inheritances. This way, you can earn back not just the money, but something more important, Dad's trust. Mark looked up, his voice hoarse. Why would you do this, after everything we've done? I thought of Dad's journal, of his faith in me, and the family we once were. Because Dad believed in second chances, I said softly. And so do I. It wasn't easy. Rachel and Mark resisted at first, testing boundaries and pushing limits. But slowly, they began to change. A year later, I sat in Dad's old office, watching through the window as Rachel explained tax forms to a client with surprising patience. Mark's laughter echoed from the break room, where he was organizing a charity drive. Dad's journal rested on my desk, its pages a testament to how far we'd come. On the last page, I had added my own words. Asterisk, you were right, Dad. Sometimes love means making a hard choice. It means giving people the chance to change, even when they don't believe in themselves. We're not perfect, but we're a family again. And I think you'd be proud. Asterisk. I closed the journal and looked out at the city skyline, the morning sun casting its warm light over everything. Somewhere, I like to think, Dad was watching, finally at peace.